I'm going to show you how to make this flannel fringe blanket. It's an easy project that you can make for graduation or a baby blanket. The supplies that you will need for this project are 3 coordinating pieces of flannel, approximately 2 yards each, a cutting mat, a rotary cutter, a ruler, and snippet scissors. I prefer to use short snips through fabric by Fiskars. It has a safety mechanism as well as spring action since there's lots of cutting in this project. Cut your flannel fabric using a rotary cutter and a cutting mat, and I'm going to cut mine at 11 inches. I'm then going to make 11-inch squares. By cutting off my salvages. And making, again, 11 inches. Once you're done cutting, you should have 3 flannel pieces, 11-inch squares. Now we're ready to go to the sewing machine. At your sewing machine, layer your 3 squares of flannel together. You can use pins to hold them together, but I find that flannel is pretty sticky and you don't need to. Once your 3 layers are together, and it doesn't have to be perfect since we're going to have a fringe, you're going to sew them from corner to corner using a straight stitch and a coordinating thread. You can mark this if you're more comfortable. I kind of just eyeball it and it works just fine. Now that all of my squares have been sewn together, I'm going to start making my quilts. Start by laying it out in the pattern that you choose. I decided to do a checkerboard, so I'm going to make sure that the coordinating fabrics are facing together. And I'm going to sew them together using a straight stitch and a 5/8 inch seam allowance, which is right here on my sewing machine. And go ahead and just line them up. You can use a pin if you're more comfortable, pins if you're more comfortable. Take your time because there is a lot of fabric. And one side should look like this, but the other side should look like this with all of this lovely edge that we will cut. When sewing your rows together, make sure that you still have your checkerboard pattern. A helpful tip is to open your seam allowances when you're sewing. Open your seam allowances so that there's not so much bulk going across. I like to open them. And it's easier to cut once we get to the cutting part of our seams. Again, use the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Take your time because you don't want to break a needle. Once you've finished sewing all your squares together, we're going to sew around the entire blanket using a 5/8 inch seam allowance as well. We're going to, this time though, make sure to start and stop and kind of start in a little bit at that 5/8 of an inch and back tack so that it doesn't, you don't want the threads to come undone. You're going to sew all the way around. When you get to your seam, open your seam allowance again because it's very thick. And take your time at that seam allowance. When you hit your corner, needle down, press your foot up, and just turn and continue. And do that till you've gone all the way around. Now I'm going to show you how to use your Fisker scissors and how to cut your fringe. On the outside, we're just going to cut up to about 1/8 of an inch every 1/4 inch. It's a great thing to do while you're watching a movie. And you're going to want to do all the layers. Be careful, take your time, because you don't want to cut into that seam. You can do bigger if you prefer, such as a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch or even a full inch, but I do like a little 1/4 inch fringe. When you come up to a seam, you're going to snip this way and on this side so that they can kind of come up and continue to cut your fringe. And I actually get into this part and cut them both. Right there. When we get to the inside pieces, we're also going to cut those at a 1/4 inch. You can do them on one side or all 6 layers together. I kind of like to do all 6 layers together. Make sure it's folded well. Just take your time and cut your 1/4 inch fringe. When you get to the centers and you get everything all cut, it should look about like this, but make sure you get in there and you cut all of your little pieces. Just take your time and fringe them up so they get to look kind of like that. And then your corners should look, when everything gets done, like that. When you're all done cutting your fringe, you can put this blanket in the washer and dryer and make this even more pretty, or you can leave it the way it is. Make sure you go over and that you've caught all the little pieces that are in it, and then fold it up and give it away as your gift, or enjoy it camping or on your couch with a glass of wine and a movie. Happy sewing!